Taking a titanium wrench to the back of the skull wasn't the worst part of my day. The worst part was waking up and realizing I was bleeding all over my very last clean uniform. My head throbbed in rhythm with the dull, mechanical hum of Sector 4. The air tasted heavily of ozone, recycled sweat, and bad decisions. I peeled my face off the cold, grated steel floor, groaning as my vision swam. Through the blur, I saw a pair of heavy, military-grade combat boots pacing in front of me. "Listen up, corporate wage slaves," a voice boomed. It belonged to Commander Vance, the guy in charge of base security. He was currently holding a highly illegal plasma rifle. Tranquility Prime is now under new management. Earth pays up, or you all stop breathing. Simple economics. I blinked slowly, trying to process this. My brain felt like it had been run over by a lunar rover. Let me get this straight. I signed a 5-year contract to fix clogged toilets and patch leaky air scrubbers in low gravity, and now I was a hostage? I mentally drafted a very strongly worded email to HR. "Hey," a harsh whisper hissed from my left. I turned my head, wincing. Sarah, the chief botanist, was sitting tied to a pipe next to me. Her crisp white lab coat was smeared with grease. She was doing that weird thing with her jaw again, the sharp, rhythmic clenching that usually meant she was trying to calculate the most efficient way to murder someone using only fertilizer. "You're bleeding on my boots, Leo," she whispered angrily. "Sorry," I muttered, wiping my forehead with a dirty sleeve. "I'll try to bleed more courteously. It's hard to focus when my skull is fractured." "It's not fractured. You're just being dramatic," she shot back. "How do we get out of this?" "I don't know, Sarah. I fix pipes. I don't negotiate with heavily armed tactical squads." Vance finished his generic villain monologue, signaled to his masked goons, and they marched out of the room. The heavy blast doors slid shut behind them with a depressing, final thud. A second later, the overhead lights flickered from a sterile white to a deep, emergency red. Then came the sound. A low, whistling hiss from the ventilation shafts. "They shut off the main life support in this sector," Sarah stated, her voice tight. "We have maybe 20 minutes of breathable air before we start hallucinating, and 30 before we choke." I sighed heavily. It was always something. "Okay, let's do some quick mental math," I mumbled to myself. Option 1. Wait for corporate to negotiate our release. Result: I die of asphyxiation because corporate won't pay $5 for a stapler, let alone a ransom. Option 2. Scream for help. Result: I die of asphyxiation, but with a sore throat. Option 3. Use the master override keycard I borrowed from the supervisor's desk yesterday to open the emergency blast door. Sarah stared at me. "You have a master override card?" "I might," I said, shifting my weight to reach my back pocket. My hands were zip-tied behind my back, which was inconvenient, but Vance's goons had used the standard plastic ties. I had dislocated my own thumb doing party tricks in college enough times to know how to slip them. A sharp twist, a sickening pop, a suppressed scream, and my hands were free. I rubbed my wrists, ignoring Sarah's look of disgusted impressedness, and dug into my pocket. I pulled out a sleek, black keycard. Behold, the ticket to not dying. I stood up, feeling a wave of nausea, and took a step toward the door console. That was when the air vent above us gave a violent shudder. A thick cloud of stagnant lunar dust blasted out right into my face. "Achoo!" I sneezed violently. My hand jerked. The black keycard slipped from my fingers. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the card hit the metal grating, bounce twice, and land perfectly in the center of the aisle. "I'll get it," I grumbled, taking a step forward. Before my boot could hit the floor, a soft whirring sound echoed from the corner. A small, flat, disc-shaped cleaning bottom modified industrial Roomba rolled out from under a workbench. Its little sweeping brushes spun merrily. It rolled right over the keycard, sucked it up into its internal storage, and chirped a happy digital tune. I froze. Sarah froze. The Roomba spun around, headed straight for the wall, and deposited its trash load directly into the Sector 4 incinerator chute. A bright flash of orange flame illuminated the room for a fraction of a second. "Did Sarah started, her voice eerily calm. "Did that automated vacuum cleaner just eat and incinerate our only ticket to oxygen?" I stared at the spot where the card used to be. "It did appear so, yes." "You dropped it because you sneezed." It was a very forceful sneeze, Sarah. The dust in here is a hazard. OSHA would have a field day. We are going to die, she said, her jaw clenching so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. I am going to die suffocating next to a janitor who got bested by a vacuum. Hey, I'm a sanitation technician. Have some respect, I said, already dropping to my knees to inspect the hissing air vent. The air pressure in the room was dropping fast. My ears were popping. I reached to my tool belt, which the mercs had miraculously ignored because it just looked like a pouch of garbage. I pulled out my holy grail, a slightly dented roll of heavy-duty silver duct tape. Step 1. Apply tape, I muttered, ripping off a long strip and slapping it over the vent grate. The whistling stopped instantly. The tape bulged slightly from the pressure, but it held. Step 2. Pray to a god I haven't spoken to since middle school. You taped the vent, Sarah said flatly. You fixed a life support sabotage with tape. Tape holds the universe together, Sarah. You'd know that if you didn't spend all day talking to tomatoes. I stood back up, feeling a momentary rush of pride. We bought ourselves maybe an hour. Now we just had to manually override the door. Suddenly, the control panel next to the blast door beeped. The screen flashed from locked to override granted. The heavy doors hissed and slowly began to slide open. Wait, Sarah whispered, stepping back. If you didn't swipe the card, who opened the door? Through the widening gap, I didn't see the rescue team. I didn't even see the mercenaries. Standing in the hallway was a 7-foot-tall automated security drone, a hulking mass of hydraulic limbs and weaponized attachments. Its optical sensor slowly panned across the room, stopping on us. The lens shifted from a passive blue to an angry, glowing crimson. An automated voice echoed from its speakers. Warning. Biological waste detected outside of designated containment zones. Initiating immediate incineration protocol. I looked at the giant robot, then down at my roll of duct tape. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. How much tape does it take to wrap a killer robot? The smell of my own singed arm hair was not how I wanted to start my afternoon. There were many things I expected to kill me on this lifeless lunar rock: boredom, scurvy, or the synthetic cafeteria coffee. But a 7-foot mechanized trash collector wasn't on TH. E-bingo card. I dove hard to the left, tackling Sarah as a jet of superheated plasma scorched the air right where my head had been a second ago. We slammed into the grated floor and scrambled desperately behind a heavy titanium workbench. The drone's heavy mechanical footsteps clanked against the metal, slow and methodical. Target acquired. Organic anomaly. Please remain stationary for thermal sanitization. Its cheerful, automated voice echoed through the room. Do you have a plan that doesn't involve office supplies? Sarah yelled over the hum of the drone's charging plasma capacitor. She was clutching a heavy hydro spanner she'd snatched from the floor, her jaw clenching, so hard I could hear her teeth grinding. Duct tape built this company, Sarah. I hissed back, peering around the edge of the bench. The drone's crimson optical sensor was sweeping the room like a demonic lighthouse. Okay, let's do the mental math here. Option 1. We charge it barehanded. Result, we become carbon smudges and the corporation bills my grieving mother for the cleaning cost. Option 2. We run for the open blast door. Result, we get shot in the back. Option 3. We blind the giant metal cyclops. And how do we blind it? She demanded, eyes wide. I need a distraction, I said, ripping off a massive, 3-foot strip of silver tape. I doubled it over, sticky side out, wrapping it around a heavy steel bolt I found near my boot. Throw your left shoe. Sarah stared at me like I had just asked her to eat lunar rocks. My boot? Are you insane? It's programmed to target loose biological waste. You've been sweating in those boots for a 12-hour shift in a hydroponics bay. To that robot, your shoe is basically a toxic biohazard. Throw it. With a frustrated growl, she frantically unlaced her heavy work boot, yanked it off, and hurled it over the workbench toward the far corner of the room. The drone's head snaps toward the flying footwear. Warning. Airborne contaminant detected. It raised its arm. A bright blue pulse of plasma blasted the boot into a shower of burning leather and melting rubber. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted out from behind cover, sliding across the grease-licked floor. The drone's head whirred, attempting to lock back onto me, but I was already under its firing arc. I swung my arm in a wide arc and slapped the heavy, bolt-weighted strip of duct tape directly across its glowing red optical lens. I hit the deck and rolled just as a blind blast of plasma blew a hole in the ceiling above me. Error. Visual sensors obscured. Engaging blind sweep protocol, the drone chirped. It began spinning in a slow circle, firing sporadic, wild shots in every direction. Crawl. Now! I yelled. Sarah and I scrambled on our hands and knees, keeping our heads practically pressed against the floor as plasma beams sizzled through the air inches above us. We crawled frantically toward the open blast doors, slipping on spilled coolant in sheer panic. We tumbled out into Corridor C and I slammed my fist onto the external door console. The heavy blast door slid shut, cutting off the drone's wild firing just as a beam melted the control panel into slag. We sat on the floor of the hallway, gasping for air. The silence was heavy, broken only by our ragged breathing. Sarah looked down at her one-socked foot, then at me. You owe me a new pair of boots, Leo. If we live through this, I will buy you the finest boots on earth, I panted, wiping a streak of black grease from my forehead. I'll even pay for premium shipping. I stood up slowly, leaning against the cold metal wall. My knees felt like jelly, but a wave of relief washed over me. We had beaten the drone. We were out of the locked sector. All we had to do now was sneak past a heavily armed squad of professional mercenaries, reach the communication array, and call Earth for a rescue. Simple. Leo, Sarah whispered. She had stood up and was looking through the reinforced glass window that overlooked the central atrium, the massive multi-level hub of the station. Yeah, I know we need a plan to deal with Vance's goons, I said, dusting off my uniform. No, Leo. Look. I stepped up to the window and looked down into the atrium. I had expected to see Vance and his mercenaries setting up a command post, drinking stolen coffee, and negotiating their ransom. Instead, the atrium was a war zone. Vance's elite, heavily armed squad was pinned down behind overturned cargo crates, firing their assault rifles in absolute desperation. But they weren't fighting security guards. They were fighting the station. Dozens of modified janitorial bots, heavy-lifting warehouse loaders, and welding drones were swarming the mercenaries. As we watched, a massive, hydraulic forklift drone grabbed one of the screaming mercs by the waist, hoisted him into the air, and casually tossed him down the industrial laundry chute. The immediate threat of the mercenaries wasn't the main problem. The station's broken AI hadn't just labeled us as bio-waste. It had labeled everyone as an infestation, and it was aggressively cleaning house. I looked at the unfolding, visually bizarre robot apocalypse below us, then down at my half-used roll of duct tape. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. We weren't hostages anymore. We were just next on the chore list. Watching a 6-ton hydraulic cargo loader play dodgeball with a heavily armed mercenary was objectively hilarious, right up until I remembered we were trapped in the exact same buoy. Elting. Down in the central atrium, Commander Vance's squad was losing ground. The station's AI wasn't using tactics. It was just throwing industrial equipment at them with the relentless enthusiasm of a toddler throwing toys out of a crib. A barrage of high-velocity plasma fire tore a welding bot to shreds, but 2 more scuttled over its sparking remains, brandishing blowtorches. Okay, let's do the mental math here, I muttered, leaning my forehead against the reinforced glass. Option 1. We wait for the mercenaries to destroy the robots. Result. The mercs win and Vance shoots us for escaping. Option 2. We wait for the robots to destroy the mercs. Result. The robots win and we get tossed into the incinerator as uncooperative compost. Option 3. Option 3 is we don't stand in front of a giant window while a war is happening, Sarah snapped, grabbing the back of my collar and yanking me down beneath the sill. She was right. A stray plasma bolt zipped past the glass, leaving a glowing, melted streak across the heavy pane. I slumped against the wall next to her, rubbing the back of my neck. Do you actually have an option 3, or were you just talking to hear your own voice? She asked. Her fingers were drumming a frantic, uneven rhythm against the side of her stolen hydro spanner. I always have an option 3, I said, pointing down the dimly lit corridor C. The maintenance crawl spaces. They run between the inner pressure hull and the outer radiation shielding. The AI doesn't track biosigns in there because it's strictly a mechanical zone. Sarah narrowed her eyes. How do you know that? Because for the last 2 years, I've been using them to take unsanctioned naps during my shift, I admitted completely deadpan. The hum of the primary coolant pumps is basically a giant white noise machine. Very soothing. She stared at me for a long, painful second. I watched her jaw do that sharp, rhythmic clenching thing again. You were the most spectacularly useless human being I have ever met, Leo. Hey, my laziness is currently saving our lives. You're welcome. I pushed myself up and jogged down the corridor, keeping low. About 30 paces down, I found what I was looking for. A heavy, square maintenance hatch bolted into the lower wall. I pulled a flathead driver from my trash pouch tool belt and jammed it into the manual release slot. With a harsh screech of unoiled metal, the panel popped open, revealing a tunnel of absolute darkness that smelled heavily of copper and stale dust. Ladies first, I offered, gesturing to the black hole. If I go first, you'll probably seal the door behind me and take a nap, Sarah grumbled, but she dropped to her hands and knees and crawled inside. I followed, pulling the heavy metal grate shut behind us. The crawl space was barely wide enough for my shoulders. The only light came from the faint, sickly green glow of the emergency fiber optics running along the ceiling. We crawled in silence for a few minutes, the muffled sounds of the robot mercenary war fading behind us. For a brief, shining moment, I actually thought things were going to be okay. Then the floor vibrated. It wasn't a heavy, booming tremor like an explosion. It was a high-frequency, skittering vibration. It sounded like 1,000 tiny metallic claws scrambling over sheet metal, and it was coming from the darkness dead ahead of us. Tell me that's just the coolant pumps, Sarah whispered. She had stopped crawling. I'd love to, but the coolant pumps don't sound like a plague of angry mechanical locusts, I whispered back, straining my eyes in the gloom. 2 pinpricks of red light flickered in the dark ahead of Sarah. Then 4. Then a dozen. A mechanical voice, tiny and tinny like a broken toy, echoed down the shaft. Microcontaminants detected in arterial vents. Deploying pest control swarm. Pest control? Sarah echoed, her voice rising an octave. Out of the shadows poured a wave of micro-scrubbers. They were roughly the size of large rats, built of jagged chrome and armed with rapidly spinning, surgical steel cleaning brushes meant to scour rust-off pipes. Right now, those brushes looked awfully capable of scouring flesh off bones. Reverse. Reverse. I yelled, frantically trying to scramble backward. I can't crawl backward fast enough. Sarah kicked out blindly, her socked foot hitting one of the leading ratbots. It chirped angrily, its brushes whirring like a miniature chainsaw as it chewed into the fabric of her sock. She shrieked, kicking it off. We were bottlenecked. There was no room to turn around. If they swarmed her, they'd strip her to the bone in seconds and I'd be next. Leo, she screamed as the front wave of the swarm lunged. Hold on, I shouted. I ripped the roll of duct tape from my belt. I pulled a massive strip, sticky side up, and slapped it onto the floor of the vent right between Sarah's legs. I tore off another, slapping it across the walls, creating a haphazard, incredibly sticky tripwire. Keep kicking them back. Sarah drove her remaining heavy boot into the swarm, launching 2 of the ratbots backward. The others surged forward, their tiny treads spinning. The first 3 hit the duct's tape. Their treads snagged instantly on the industrial-strength adhesive. They whirred furiously, motors whining in distress as they glued themselves to the floor. The bots behind them didn't have the programming to stop. They simply drove over their stuck comrades, straight into the next layer of tape I was frantically stringing up. Within 10 seconds, we had a writhing, buzzing roadblock of stuck ratbots clogging the narrow tunnel. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, resting my forehead against the cold metal wall. See? Tape holds the universe together. You made a flight paper trap for robots, Sarah panted, staring at the struggling metallic mass inches from her face. I can't believe that actually worked. Never underestimate a janitor with inadequate supplies, I said, wiping a line of cold sweat from my face. Now keep moving. We need to find the nearest drop-down hatch before they chew through the tape. We crawled backward for what felt like an eternity, taking a side branch of the shaft to bypass the blockage. Finally, the faint green light illuminated a square hatch on the floor beneath us. "Here," I said, reaching past her to hit the release latch. "This should drop us right into the hydroponics storage wing. It's close to the columns array." The hatch swung open downward. I poked my head through the opening, expecting to see familiar stacks of fertilizer and UV lamps. Instead, I found myself staring directly down the barrel of a charged plasma rifle, held by a mercenary whose armor was covered in deep, terrifying claw marks. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me. How did a merc get into the locked agricultural sector, and what the hell left those claw marks?" Looking down the barrel of a military-grade plasma rifle is a lot like looking into an industrial microwave. You know it's going to instantly cook whatever is inside, and today, that hot pocket was my face. "Okay, let's do the mental math here," I whispered to myself, hanging halfway out of the ceiling hatch. Option 1. Put my hands up, surrender, and hope mercenaries respect the Geneva Convention on the moon. Option 2. Try to pull myself back up into the vent and get eaten by the robot rat swarm. Option 3. Wait, why is the gun vibrating? I squinted through the dim, purple UV lighting of the hydroponics wing. The mercenary holding the rifle wasn't aiming with lethal precision. He was shaking violently. His heavy, matte black tactical armor, the stuff supposed to withstand small arms fire and vacuum depressurization, was shredded across the chest. 4 massive, jagged claw marks had peeled the Kevlar back like a tin can. Dark, bubbling blood was pooling on the pristine white floor of Sarah's beloved greenhouse. He didn't even seem to register my face. His wild, bloodshot eyes were darting rapidly toward the dense, overgrown foliage at the far end of the sector. Shut the hatch," the mercenary wheezed, his voice bubbling with liquid. He lowered the rifle, clutching his ruined chest, and collapsed to his knees. "Don't let them hear you." I didn't need to be told twice. I dropped down onto the soft, rubberized matting of the greenhouse floor and immediately reached back up to help Sarah. She tumbled out of the vent, landing heavily against my chest. For a split second, I caught the smell of vanilla and ozone in her hair right before she elbowed me in the ribs and pushed herself away. I slammed the ceiling hatch shut and locked it, cutting off the faint buzzing of the stuck rat bots above us. Sarah spun around, her hydro spanner raised as a weapon, but froze when she saw the dying mercenary bleeding all over a row of prize-winning lunar cabbages. Her jaw immediately started its rhythmic, angry clenching. "He's bleeding on the nitrogen soil," she hissed, sounding genuinely offended. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to balance the pH levels in this sector?" "Sarah, I really think the pH balance is the least of his problems right now," I said, cautiously stepping toward the man. I knelt beside him, my boots squelching in the bloody mud. Up close, the wounds were even worse. The cuts were incredibly deep, cauterized at the edges by some kind of acidic residue that was literally eating through the remaining plastic of his armor. I reached for my tool pouch, instinctively looking for something to patch him up with. "Don't bother," the merc coughed, grabbing my wrist with a grip like a vice. His hands were freezing. Van Sans was an idiot. We thought we were just taking the helium-3. We didn't know what corporate was actually hiding down here. "Hiding?" Sarah stepped closer, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her disgust. "Corporate doesn't hide anything in hydroponics. This is a sanctioned food growth facility. I oversee every single seedling." The merc let out a wet, rattling laugh that quickly turned into a violent coughing fit. "You just grow the food, lady. You don't know what they put in the fertilizer. The AI, it didn't glitch. It's trying to purge the infection." He convulsed once, his grip on my wrist going slack, and his head rolled back against a hydroponic nutrient tank. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. I slowly stood up, wiping a smear of blood off my wrist onto my pants. The silence in the massive, humid greenhouse was sudden and deafening, broken only by the rhythmic dripping of the automated irrigation system. Drip, drip, drip. "Well, that's just fantastic," I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. I love a good cryptic deathbed warning. It really adds to the ambience of being hunted. I looked over at Sarah. She was staring at the massive claw marks on the dead man's armor, her pale face illuminated by the eerie purple grow lights. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, she actually looked terrified. "Leo," she said quietly, Warehouse loading bots have hydraulic pinchers. Welding drones have torches. Security bots have plasma weapons. I know, I replied, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Nothing on this station has claws. I know, Sarah. And nothing biological could have snuck onto the station without the quarantine sensors triggering. Unless, I pointed out, gesturing to the dead man, it was already here, growing in the dark. Which brings me to a very uncomfortable question, Chief Botanist. What exactly have you been feeding these plants? She crossed her arms defensively, though her fingers were trembling slightly. Standard corporate-approved nutrient paste, recycled water, artificial sunlight, and, well, the organic bio-sludge from the Sector 4 waste recyclers. I stared at her. Wait, you mean my sector? You've been feeding the plants the mystery garbage from the lower decks? The stuff I explicitly log every week as highly unstable and smells like sadness? It's rich in nitrates. She shot back, stepping toward me. It's highly efficient. Corporate commended me for my recycling initiative. Corporate also pays me minimum wage to risk radiation poisoning on a daily basis. They aren't exactly a moral compass for good ideas. I stopped arguing. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. A shadow moved in the dense, jungle-like foliage of Sector 4B, about 50 yards away. The tomato vines in that section were massive, easily 12 feet tall, thick, and twisted like green pythons. But the shadow wasn't moving with the gentle draft of the ventilation system. It was moving against it. Thud. A heavy, wet footstep echoed from the darkness behind the vines. Thud. Then came a sound that made my blood run absolutely cold. It was a rapid, clicking noise like a tongue clicking against the roof of a mouth, but amplified and distorted, sounding wet and hollow. Sarah backed up slowly, her shoulder bumping into mine. I didn't move away. Leo, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the UV lights. Did you bring enough tape to fix a monster? I slowly unclipped the silver roll from my belt, staring into the dark, rustling leaves. I don't know, Sarah, I muttered, my heart hammering against my ribs. But if it bleeds, I can probably stick it to a wall. If I get eaten by an alien monster, I really hope it's a cool one, like a shadow stalker or a genetically engineered superwolf. Being torn apart by a creature that smells strongly of wet compost and overripe tomatoes feels incredibly undignified. The 12-foot tomato vines violently parted. Stepping out into the purple glow of the UV lights was something that defied basic biology and common decency. It looked like a pale, segmented grub, but the size of a delivery van. It had 8 thick, fleshy legs ending in jagged, chitinous claws, and a circular, lamprey-like mouth that was currently dripping a viscous, glowing green acid onto the pristine FL. Or, what in the name of underpaid labor is that? I whispered, taking a very slow step backward. Sarah's breath hitched. She didn't scream, but her hands flew to her face, aggressively rubbing her temples in tight, frantic circles, a clear sign her brilliant scientific mind was violently rejecting Liddy. It has the morphological structure of a tardigrade. A water bear. A water bear? I hissed, keeping my eyes on the nightmare as it clicked its mandibles. Sarah, that thing is the size of a minivan. If that's a bear, I am a chew toy. It shouldn't be macro-sized. It's scientifically impossible unless the bio-sludge from your sector was heavily irradiated and mixed with experimental growth hormones from my sector. Oh great. So it's our child. We should name it, I grumbled, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Let's do some mental math here, Mom. Option 1. We try to domesticate little Timmy. Result, we get dissolved into a nutrient smoothie. Option 2. We shoot it with the dead mercenary's gun. Result, I have absolutely zero combat training and will definitely blow up the oxygen scrubbers. Option 3. I looked down at the dead mercenary, then at the heavy, alien-looking plasma rifle resting loosely in his grip. Then I looked up at the ceiling, where a massive, automated rotary sprinkler hung suspended on a heavy steel track, designed to water the entire greenhouse block. Option 3 involves a lot of tape and property damage. I decided, dropping to my knees next to the corpse. I grabbed the plasma rifle. It was heavy, covered in sticky blood, and hummed with lethal energy. The monster let out a deafening, wet screech that rattled my teeth and charged. It didn't run. It propelled itself forward with horrifying, undulating speed, its claws tearing massive gouges into the rubberized floor. "Leo!" Sarah screamed, backing up against a row of hydroponic vats. "Give me a sec, I'm doing arts and crafts," I yelled. I ripped off a massive strip of silver duct tape and slapped it directly over the rifle's firing trigger, pinning it down. The gun instantly spat a blinding bolt of blue plasma that scorched the wall 3 feet to my left. I yelped, nearly dropping it, but scrambled up onto a nearby fertilizer transport cart. The giant water bear thing was halfway across the greenhouse, knocking over heavy steel racks like they were made of matchsticks. I reached up, slamming the wildly firing plasma rifle against the nozzle of the overhead rotary sprinkler. I frantically wrapped loop after loop of duct tape around the gun and the metal pipe, securing it in a messy, glowing, silver cocoon. "Sprinkler controls," I shouted at Sarah over the deafening pew-pew-pew of the rifle. "Turn on Sector 4B. Sarah didn't hesitate. She dove behind the main control terminal, her fingers flying across the muddy glass screen. Activating high-pressure rotation. The overhead sprinkler system whirred to life. With the water pressure blasting through the nozzle, the entire unit began to spin. Fast. Suddenly, we had a makeshift, fully automated, 360-degree plasma turret mounted to the ceiling. Bolts of superheated energy sprayed across the greenhouse in a blinding, chaotic disco of death. One bolt sheared the top off a prize-winning cabbage. Another shattered a row of UV lamps, showering the room in sparks. But most importantly, a solid line of plasma bolts raked directly across the charging monster's pale, fleshy back. The creature shrieked a sound like metal tearing underwater and thrashed wildly as the plasma cooked its thick hide. It snapped its massive jaws at the ceiling, momentarily distracted by the spinning death machine raining fire from above. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah by the sleeve of her lab coat. We sprinted through the dense foliage, ducking under erratic crossfire as our DIY turret indiscriminately blasted the entire agricultural bay. The smell of burning leaves and ozone was suffocating. We burst through the far doors of the greenhouse, diving into the sterile white hallway of the connecting bridge just as a stray plasma bolt hit a massive, pressurized tank of liquid nitrogen fertilizer behind us. The explosion was magnificent. A shockwave of freezing blue mist and pulverized plant matter blasted us off our feet. We skidded across the hallway floor in a tangle of limbs, coughing and gasping for air. The heavy blast doors automatically slammed shut, sealing the freezing ruined greenhouse and hopefully the monster behind us. I lay flat on my back, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember how to breathe. My ears were ringing, and I was covered in wet dirt and a very questionable amount of mutant tomato paste. Sarah pushed herself up onto her elbows. She looked at the sealed blast doors, then looked down at me. She was covered in soot, her hair was a disaster, and she was missing a boot. "You just destroyed 3 years of vital botanical research with a roll of tape and a stolen gun," she panted, her eyes wide. "You're welcome," I wheezed, giving her a weak thumbs up. "I think that officially makes me the employee of the month." I rolled over, preparing to stand up and complain about my back, when the floor beneath us groaned. It wasn't a mechanical vibration this time. It was the sound of stressed titanium yielding to immense weight. I looked down. The pristine white tiles of the hallway floor were bubbling. A dark, sizzling green acid was seeping through the seams, eating through the metal decking right beneath our bodies. The creature hadn't died in the explosion. It had dug under the floorboards to escape the cold. "Oh, you got to be kidding me. How deep did these floors go?" Before I could formulate an answer, the metal gave way, and the floor dropped out from under us. My spine made a sound like a stepped-on bag of potato chips when I hit the floor. The wind was violently knocked out of my lungs, followed a split second later by a heavy, lab coat-wearing weight slamming directly into my chest. "Get off my spleen, Sarah," I wheezed, staring blindly up into the darkness. "I can't see anything," she groaned, rolling off me and collapsing onto the cold metal grating. "Do we just fall into the waste recyclers? If we did, we'd be waist-deep in the terrifying mystery sludge that you've been feeding your tomatoes," I croaked, slowly pushing myself up into a sitting position. My entire body throbbed, but nothing felt permanently broken. Corporate gravity plating was cheap, but apparently it had cushioned our 20-foot drop just enough to prevent us from turning into human pancakes. I reached up and tapped the emergency light on my shoulder harness. A harsh, narrow beam of white LED cut through the gloom. We weren't in a maintenance tunnel, and we definitely weren't in a waste tank. We were sitting in the middle of a massive, sterile, and entirely unmapped laboratory. The walls were lined with seamless brushed steel, illuminated only by the faint, pulsing amber glow of emergency floor strips. Rows of high-tech server racks and massive, cylindrical glass containment vats stretched into the shadows. The air down here was freezing, and it smelled distinctly of medical-grade bleach and burnt copper. "Where are we?" Sarah whispered, pulling herself up. She winced, shifting her weight awkwardly off her socked foot. There are no sub-levels beneath hydroponics. The blueprints show solid bedrock and radiation shielding under Sector 4. Corporate lied on a blueprint to save money and hide illegal activities? Color me shocked, I said, shining my light across the room. I'm going to add discovered secret evil layer to my overtime sheet. Sarah hobbled over to a nearby steel counter, leaning heavily on it. She looked down at her foot, then did that sharp, rhythmic jaw-clenching thing. Her white sock was stained with dirt, soot, and a tiny bit of glowing green acid that was slowly eating a hole through the heel. "My foot is freezing, and I think I have mutant tomato paste in my toes," she grumbled, sounding more deeply offended by the hygiene violation than the fact we almost died. "Sit down," I sighed, pulling the dented roll of heavy-duty silver tape from my belt. She eyed me suspiciously. "What are you doing?" "I am the lowest paid sanitation engineer on this rock, but I am also a visionary," I said, kneeling in front of her. "Give me your foot." She hesitated, then gingerly lifted her foot. I ripped off a long strip of tape and began wrapping it over her ruined sock, layering it across the sole and over the heel. "Okay, let's do the mental math here," I muttered as I worked. Option 1. You walk barefoot in a secret biolab and step on an irradiated staple, turning into a zombie. Option 2. I carry you, my back gives out, and we both die awkwardly on the floor. Option 3. The DIY duct tape moon boot. I slapped the final piece of tape across her instep, sealing it tight. There. Waterproof, chemical-resistant, and incredibly unfashionable. "Cinderella, your silver slipper is ready." Sarah lowered her tape-wrapped foot to the grating. She tapped it a few times, testing the grip. She looked at me, a highly complicated expression crossing her dirt-smudged face. It was a mix of intense annoyance, mild disbelief, and grudging respect. "If this gives me a rash, I am docking your pay," she said finally. "Joke's on you, they already pay me an exposure," I replied, standing back up and shining my light down the aisle of glass vats. "Come on, let's figure out what corporate was actually doing down here before our 8-legged friend figures out how to use the stairs." We moved cautiously down the aisle. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Our breath plumed in the air. Sarah stopped in front of one of the massive cylindrical vats. The thick, reinforced glass was entirely shattered. The jagged edges were bent outward, as if something incredibly strong had exploded from the inside. Thick, glowing green residue, the same stuff the tardigrade was dripping, coated the bottom of the ruined tank. "Leo," she called out, her voice tight. She was pointing at a metal placard bolted to the base of the tank. I stepped closer and wiped a layer of frost off the placard. Project Charybdis. Subject 04. Macrotardigrade mutation strain B purpose. Deep vein helium mining in high radiation environments. "They weren't just feeding them your bio sludge," Sarah whispered, her scientific curiosity completely overshadowed by horror. "They were genetically modifying microorganisms to survive extreme lunar radiation, scaling them up, and trying to use them as unpaid biological mining equipment. So, instead of paying union miners, corporate-built giant, acid-spitting water bears," I translated, rubbing my temples. "That is the most aggressively capitalist thing I have ever heard." "Look at the other tanks," she said, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. I swept my flashlight across the room. There were dozens of tanks. Dozens. And every single one of them had a massive hole smashed through the glass from the inside. The biominers hadn't just escaped. They had broken out a long time ago. Before I could even begin to process the sheer volume of monsters currently loose in the walls of the station, The amber emergency lights in the lab suddenly snapped to a blinding, sterile white. A massive, heavy steel blast door at the far end of the lab slammed shut with a concussive boom that rattled my teeth. The station's automated AI voice crackled through the overhead speakers, but it didn't sound cheerful anymore. It sounded degraded, skipping like a scratched record. Warning: quarantine level black breached. Unauthorized biological anomalies detected in containment zone. Initiating total sterilization protocol. Sterilization? Sarah gasped, grabbing my arm. Above us, heavy mechanical vents ear-eyed open. But it wasn't the robot rat swarm this time. A thick, pale yellow gas began pouring from the ceiling, plummeting toward the floor like a heavy fog. It smelled like sulfur and burning hair. Deploying neurotoxin flood, the AI cheerfully concluded. Have a productive day. I looked at the rapidly descending cloud of lethal gas, then down at my roll of duct tape. It was almost empty. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. How much tape does it take to seal a room the size of a football field? Okay, let's do the mental math here, I muttered, watching the thick, sulfurous yellow cloud of neurotoxin plummet from the ceiling vents like a highly aggressive weather system. Option 1, we hold our breath for the next hour and discover a hidden evolutionary trait. Option 2, I try to tape the massive ceiling vents shut, fall off a ladder, and die of a broken neck before the gas gets me. Option 3, I frantically looked around the freezing, strobe-lit biolab. My eyes locked onto a bright orange box on the wall marked Emergency Biohazard Disposal. Beside it were the massive, shattered glass vats that used to hold the mutant water bears. Thick, braided hoses snaked from the wall into the base of each tank, bubbling with residual aeration. Option 3 involves significant personal space violations, I decided. I sprinted to the orange box, smashed the plastic cover with my elbow, and yanked out a heavy-duty, transparent bio-waste containment bag. It was roughly the size of a small tent and designed to hold irradiated corpses. Perfect. Sarah, over here, I yelled, tossing the bag toward her. She hobbled over as fast as her DIY duct tape shoe would allow, clutching her stolen hydro spanner like a safety blanket. Are you proposing we bag ourselves like garbage? I am a sanitation worker, Sarah. Garbage is my element, I said, dropping to my knees next to the shattered remains of Subject 04 tank. I grabbed the heavy aeration hose, which was still violently hissing pure, pressurized oxygen into the glowing green puddle of sludge. I pulled the hose free, dragging it toward the plastic bag. The yellow gas was at waist level and dropping fast. The smell of sulfur was already burning the back of my throat, making my eyes water and my stomach heave. Get in, I barked, pulling the bag over my head and holding the bottom open. Sarah didn't argue. She ducked under the heavy plastic, pressing her back against my chest as I pulled the bag down to the floor. We were completely encased in the transparent, airtight bubble. Hold the edges down flat, I ordered, shoving the hissing oxygen hose up into the bag with us. I took the very last 2 feet of my holy duct tape and frantically slapped it along the rim where the plastic met the metal floor, creating a crude, messy seal. Seconds later, the yellow fog swallowed us entirely. From inside our plastic bubble, the world turned into a swirling, sickly mustard color. The pure oxygen from the hose inflated the bag around us like a bouncy castle, pushing back against the heavy neurotoxin outside. I sat cross-legged on the floor, holding the hose, trying to slow my violently racing heart. The hissing of the airline was deafening in the enclosed space. Sarah was sitting inches from my face, her knees pulled to her chest. She was doing that sharp, rhythmic jaw-clenching thing again, staring out through the plastic at the swirling yellow death. This is degrading, she announced quietly. We are currently breathing pure, unpoisoned oxygen inside a corpse bag, Sarah. I'd say we're doing pretty well, I replied, though I was hyperventilating just a little bit. You smell like burnt hair, ozone, and cheap cafeteria coffee. And you have mutant tomato paste between your toes, but you don't hear me complaining, I shot back. Just breathe. The station AI will eventually cycle the air scrubbers once it registers the room as sterilized. For a few minutes, we just sat there in our ridiculous, inflated trash bag diving bell. The sheer absurdity of the situation washed over me. I was a junior maintenance tech, hiding in a secret corporate biolab, sharing a plastic bag with a brilliant, aggressively rude botanist, hiding from a robot apocalypse and a giant, acid-spitting water bear. I mentally drafted a demand for a 500% hazard pay increase. Suddenly, the floor beneath us vibrated. It wasn't the skittering of the robot rat swarm, and it wasn't the heavy, wet thud of the macro tardigrade. It was a rhythmic, mechanized pounding coming from the massive, locked blast door at the far end of the lab. Clang, clang, clang. Through the yellow fog, a blinding spark of blue-white light pierced the gloom. "Someone is cutting through the door," Sarah whispered, leaning forward, her breath fogging the plastic. "The robots don't need to cut doors, they just override them," I realized, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The hissing of a heavy plasma torch echoed through the room. A massive, glowing orange circle was being rapidly carved into the center of the foot-thick titanium blast door. With a deafening crash, the heavy metal circle was kicked inward, slamming onto the floor. The overhead vent suddenly roared to life. The AI voice crackled, sterilization complete, purging atmosphere. The yellow gas was rapidly sucked up into the ceiling, clearing the room in a matter of seconds. I ripped the duct tape off the floor and threw the plastic bag off us, gasping as the freezing, sterile air hit my face. I looked toward the breached blast door. Stepping through the glowing, melted hole were 4 heavily armed mercenaries, wearing sleek, military-grade rebreather masks. Leading them was Commander Vance. His armor was scorched and he looked incredibly angry. He lowered his smoking plasma cutter, his eyes scanning the ruined, shattered mutant vats, before finally locking onto me and Sarah sitting on the floor next to a discarded trash bag. He slowly raised his assault rifle, aiming it directly at my chest. Well, Vance's voice was muffled through his mask. "Look what the biohazard sweep dragged in." I looked down the barrel of his gun, then looked at my completely empty roll of duct tape. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me. How many times do I have to get held hostage in one single shift?" Staring down the barrel of a military-grade assault rifle while sitting next to a deflated trash bag is a severe blow to my professional dignity. Commander Vance stepped fully into the lab, his heavy boots crunching over the melted slag of the blast door. 3 of his surviving mercenaries fanned out behind him, their weapons trained on us. The sterile white lights of the lab reflected off their rebreather masks, making them look like angry, tactical insects. "I expected to find a lot of things down here after the AI locked us out," Vance said, his muffled voice dripping with annoyance. "Mutants, corporate secrets, dead bodies. I did not expect to find the sanitation guy and the tomato lady having a picnic in a biohazard bag." "First of all, I'm the Chief Botanist," Sarah snapped, aggressively dusting off her ruined lab coat, completely ignoring the 4 guns pointed at her head. "And second of all, you are currently trespassing in a highly classified, Level 4 corporate containment zone. I am reporting this." I slowly dragged my hand down my face. "Sarah, please, read the room. The man with the gun doesn't care about HR violations." Vance chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. He lowered his rifle slightly, casually leaning on the heavy, smoking plasma cutter he had used to breach the door. "The janitor is right. I don't care. What I care about is the fact that half my squad just got eaten by a rogue forklift. The helium-3 vaults are locked behind biometric seals I can't break, and this station is Apparat. Anti-LY breeding giant, acid-spitting bugs. So, you 2 are going to tell me how to get to the escape shuttles, or I'm going to test how well your tape holds back bullets." "Okay, let's do the mental math here," I muttered to myself, eyeing the room. Option 1. We tell him the truth that we have absolutely no idea how to get to the shuttles, and are purely flying by the seat of our pants. Result, he shoots us for being useless. Option 2. We lie, lead him into a trap, and escape. Result, I am a terrible liar and my left eye twitches when I do it. Option 3. My eyes drifted past Vance's boots. The heavy, braided aeration hose we had used to breathe inside the trash bag was still resting on the floor near his feet. It was still hooked to the main emergency system, violently hissing pure, pressurized oxygen. Right next to it was the tip of Vance's plasma cutter, glowing cherry red and radiating waves of intense heat. Option 3 involves basic chemistry and a complete lack of self-preservation, I whispered. What was that, trash boy? Vance barked, taking a step forward. I said, I know where the shuttles are. I yelled, throwing my hands up in a placating gesture. But you're standing on the primary coolant line. Don't move. Vance hesitated, instinctively looking down at his feet. That was all the opening I needed. I grabbed Sarah by the collar of her lab coat and yanked her violently backward, diving behind the thick metal base of Subject 04 shattered containment tank. At the exact same second, I kicked the heavy oxygen hose straight into the glowing red nozzle of the plasma cutter. Wait, Vance started. Pure oxygen meets superheated plasma. The resulting explosion didn't just rattle my teeth, it felt like a physical punch to the chest. A massive ball of blinding blue and orange fire erupted in the center of the lab. The shockwave blew out the remaining glass vats in a deafening crash, showering the room in glowing green sludge and shattered tempered glass. I kept my hands clamped over the back of my neck, waiting for the heat to pass. The fire alarms immediately shrieked to life, raining a heavy, freezing chemical foam from the ceiling. Move! Now! I yelled, hauling Sarah to her feet. We scrambled out from behind the tank. The explosion had completely leveled Vance and his mercs. They were groaning on the floor, their armor scorched and their rebreathers melted. Vance was swearing violently, struggling to push himself up on a broken arm. We didn't stick around to chat. We sprinted through the smoking breach and the blast door, leaving the ruined, foam-covered biolab behind us. We burst out into a long, dimly lit access corridor. The red emergency lights were spinning lazily. At the far end of the hallway, a heavy set of reinforced elevator doors stood closed, marked with a bright yellow sign, Surface Access/Shuttle Bay. There! Sarah panted, her duct tape shoe slapping wetly against the metal floor. If we can reach the shuttles, we can override the launch sequence manually. I don't know how to fly a spaceship, I yelled, running right behind her. I grew a highly volatile hybrid strain of lunar wheat that can survive a vacuum, Leo. I think I can figure out a joystick. We reached the elevator console. I slammed my fist into the call button. To my absolute shock, the button lit up green. A soft, pleasant chime echoed through the corridor, and the heavy metal doors began to slide open. Oh, thank God, I gasped, leaning forward, ready to collapse into the safety of the elevator car. The doors fully parted. It wasn't an empty elevator car. The interior of the massive freight elevator was completely choked with a thick, pulsating webbing that looked like spun glass. Embedded in the webbing were dozens of pale, translucent eggs, each one the size of a tractor tire. As the doors opened, the sudden shift in temperature caused the eggs to shift. Crack! The egg closest to my face split open. A thick, glowing green acid oozed out, followed by a pale, fleshy leg ending in a jagged chitinous claw. I stared into the elevator, listening to the wet, chittering sounds of a dozen newborn macrotardigrades waking up, hungry and very annoyed by the draft. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. How fast do giant space bugs reproduce?